ChoralEd. Welcome to another episode of ChoralEd. I'm your host, Micah Bland. Thanks so much for watching. Today we begin a new series on choral tone, and to kick off that series, it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Giselle Wyers to the show. Dr. Wyers, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So to begin, can you describe for us your ideal choral tone?
Yeah, I think the ideal choral tone is a dream that we always wish and aspire to. And it's really related to the people in the room and what are their unique capabilities and capacity, and what is potential for them? Where can they go? So I don't have a fixed vision of choral tone. I certainly have tones that I love, and would wish to have in my chorus. But some of the words that I came up with when I was thinking about this might be vibrant or engaged in terms of how the actual vocal function is working. Vibrant and engaged, expressive, and also empowered, if we're thinking actually about the humans that are singing and the level of risk that they're willing to take with their voices, and how much they're willing to give to each other in the process. I would say I like a clean sound, and that might be linked to pitch. Intonation is very important to me, because I feel that if there are pitch problems, it's usually related to the mechanism and the way that the voice is not truly hooked up or working. So I care a lot about a clean sound, but I also think that a clean sound is linked to listening. And so that would get me into another word, which might be balanced. So that could be a balanced onset. It could also be a balanced approach to the literature. It could be a balanced approach to what they're hearing around them and the ways in which they're blending while still maintaining a healthy, functional voice. So I think those are all different words. Another word might be aligned too. And with the word aligned, I would think about vowel shape a lot, but also aligning ourselves with that literature and with that text and finding a personal connection to what we're singing, as opposed to just doing what the instructor is telling us to do.
Awesome. You talked about the vocal mechanism. Do you ever discuss much about and work with your choirs on breath, anything specific about breath, or how about vibrato, anything along the lines of vibrato?
Right. So for breath, I like to talk a lot about balanced in every respect. I mean, Kari Reagan was a colleague of mine for many years teaching at University of Washington, and she wrote a book recently that I've been relying a lot and sharing with my students. But it's important the way that people are standing. It's important that they're free of tension. It's important that they understand physically what's happening with their breathing, and emphasizing intercostal work and having a really nice open feeling to the ribs, and then of course using some abdominal connectivity too. And I like to use a lot of straw phonation or semi-occluded vocal tract exercises for that. So for me, breathing is also really linked to onset, because the way that we breathe is then how we end up starting and sustaining the sound.
Absolutely. And anything for vibrato by chance?
So for vibrato, it's hard for me because I don't want to ask a singer to not use vibrato. And it's not even possible. We've finally figured out scientifically, it's not possible to remove vibrato from our tone. But I do, I try to be informed by the repertoire and the style. I play recordings in class for the choir. I have them talk about a lean sound as opposed to a really wide sound. I think vowel shape is really important with vibrato. I think, again, semi-occluded vocal tract exercises help, and a lot of listening. So if I do have a soloistic voice, I try to encourage them to be really listening, but I also try to ask the blender voices or the softer voices to try to be more soloistic, because one thing that I think can be really unhealthy is to just be constantly badgering your best singer in the choir and asking them to sing softer. You don't really want to do that either. So there has to be that balance, that give and take, and that comes with active listening.
And I'm sure many music teachers out there were probably that louder voice in their high school, the middle school choirs growing up, and they probably have experienced that, being asked to be quieter many times, possibly growing up. So it's always an interesting challenge for sure.
Right.
You mentioned styles, and so do you ever alter tone, choral tone, between the songs and styles that you select?
Yeah, I do, but I try to not fabricate it. So I think it's more about getting the language in our ear, because usually if we're looking at style, we're also looking at language, even if it's the English language. If we're looking at earlier stylistic periods, there may be different approaches to vowel shape or bright, chiaroscuro, questioning of shadow or light in the sound. So I don't really like to use the word dark, by the way. I try to avoid that, but so yeah, if it's a piece from outside of Western European art music, then I'm going to be wanting to bring recordings if possible, culture bearers if possible, diction coaches if possible, to be talking about how the language then changes the tone, as opposed to just saying, oh, we should be really nasally for this. Yeah, so it's very individual. I just recently did a set of Indian influenced choral music from the country of India, and we chose 7 different pieces in 5 different languages, and we relied a lot on just speaking the language and listening to recordings to get a sense of where we needed to go with it.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point about language that, I guess has always been in the back of my mind, but certain languages have different colors to them just naturally. And so I think that's a really important part, that aspect, to make sure to bring that out. And then it sounds a little more authentic for sure as well.
Right.
Well, so before we go on to more questions, I want to take a brief moment here to pause and share with our viewers some audio samples of this choral tone that Dr. Wyers has been discussing. And since we'll be listening to 3 audio samples that you've provided, Dr. Wyers, would you like to introduce the songs we'll be listening to and the types of choral tone they represent?
Sure. So this is the University of Washington Choral, and this is an edited recording. So we did have a chance to do multiple takes and sing in a beautiful cathedral to get the acoustic that we wanted, which we know influences tone tremendously. And I decided to choose 3 just so that you could hear the differences in how I approach tone based on literature. The first one might be kind of a baseline on the warmer, richer side of a Western European art music sound. And so it's called Give Me the Splendid Silent Sun, and it's by Barlow, Bradford. Really beautiful piece. And the second piece is more along the lines of sort of Americana, or the shapes that I might want to create if we're dealing with like folk or pop style or Appalachian style singing. And this particular piece was written by Libby Larsen, and it's from a set called The Settling Years, but the one that we will hear is called Comin to Town. And it's almost like a cowboy kind of celebratory piece. And then the third example would be from Taiwan. So it's a Taiwanese folk song arranged by Criddle called Gao Shan Qing.
Great. Let's take a listen to those.
Shall
What a great sounding choir. Thank you for those examples. To watch the entire performance, check out the link in the description. And while you're there, hit that like and subscribe button. So back to some questions here. Are there any specific vocal exercises that you incorporate to achieve this tone that we just heard?
Right. So I think I'll go back to straw phonation. It's something I really care about and believe in. I also think doing some light kind of humming at the beginning of a warm up, just to get that feeling of really connecting here with in more of what we used to call the mask. It's not really a term that's used as much anymore. And I work a lot on checking for vocal tension in the jaw and in the throat. And I don't talk directly about lifting the soft palate, but I do like to do exercises like using imaginative language, emotional language like aha or wow, to help to feel that kind of spaciousness that we want to have in the back. And especially, I find it's helpful to have a sense of sort of tugging along the sides above the upper molars. And that feels like more important actually than having a really arced, domed soft palate position. So, we do the typical exercises. Some of them might start with a consonant as sort of a pilot to get into where we think the resonance needs to be, where the tongue needs to be. Other exercises would just be on different kinds of vowels. And those vowels might be based on different ranges for, let's say, what does it feel like as a bass to sing a low C as opposed to an alto or a soprano or whatever. So thinking about range is really important too with warm up, I think.
So if I heard correctly, you mentioned straw phonation. Can you explain that to some of our viewers who maybe are not as familiar with that technique? And maybe, I know it's mostly part of voice therapy type things. I know that's kind of where it comes from a lot, but it's also very useful.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, so I think it's a way of helping to manage the air and create a very thin stream that is an efficient amount of air, the amount that's necessary to vibrate the vocal folds without additional air pushing through the folds and causing more tension. And so by using a straw or humming or even singing through a V or a lip trill, you're creating a little bit more back pressure inside the mouth, and not as much air is leaving as swiftly as you would, for instance, on an open vowel like ah. And I've even heard that it can also help the vocal folds to line up more evenly. So if some people are having some issues with the actual vibratory mechanism, that's a way to get around that. And it's really good for voice rehab, as you mentioned. So again, Kari Reagan, I can't say her name enough, but she also talks about the importance of warming up, but also cooling down. And sometimes after you've sung for, let's say, an hour or two, you could use a straw and just sort of sing a few light sounds through the straw to kind of help warm down those muscles as well.
Yeah, I know. Back in undergrad, I had some vocal issues and my voice was going out, and that was from actually excess subglottal pressure that I was using, and that was going to the voice therapist. That's what the first thing they had me do. It was every day for so long, and this, that, and the other, all these other things. But that was one of the big ones, and so it's a very useful tool that some people don't always implement and don't think about and don't always remember that it's a very helpful vocal technique and vocal exercise.
Yeah, and it's great if you need to warm up in the car on the way to work too.
Yes, yes. You also mentioned consonants to start the sound. Are there any maybe specific consonants that you like that help your specific tone that you strive for?
I would say V. I use a lot of V. Occasionally I might use M or N. And those are, I think, useful for bringing the sound a little bit more forward, which is often something that I think we need. But if the tone is too forward, like in my alto section, I might want to remove the consonant altogether and just focus on a wider, broader vowel, maybe just letting them sing on ooh or ah or something like that. Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting, and I I do the same, but there's many different approaches. And you mentioned that you use sometimes M and N. And I know that
Right.
there's a lot of voice teachers out there and singers out there and choir directors that use M and N like constantly.
Mm.
Is there a reason why you say sometimes and maybe you stay away from it, perhaps?
Yeah, I feel like the M in particular is probably good for, like I say, that bright, even a sound that's more rooted in the chest or vocalis kind of mechanism, the chest mechanism, because it's just sort of, you feel that even before you start to sing, if you just say, oh, sorry, that's my kitty playing the piano. But if you just say, like, if you say, you can feel that it's really generated there. Whereas I feel like so maybe part of it is that you try to figure out where you feel that consonant in your head or more in your chest, and then figure out what that's going to do then for the subsequent tone. Because I wouldn't want to ask M for my high sopranos. They're not going to be happy singing a lot of M.
For sure. No,
yeah.
So do you have any specific approaches during auditions and or the placement of singers as far as a standing arrangement that helps establish your preferred tone?
Yeah, in terms of the auditions, I'm just trying to put them at ease and allowing them to sing literature that they love to sing, which may or may not be an art song or an aria. I just want to hear them singing what they want to sing. And then we talk a little bit about the choirs and what are the sounds that we might ask them to make, so that they don't get broadsided later or blindsided and say, wait, why am I singing this now? And then in terms of once we get started, within, I would say, the first or second week, I first like to just get them conditioned again, because they're usually coming off of a long summer break. So I wouldn't want to start with this, but maybe within the second week, I would ask to do some voicing similar to Western Noble's approach of shuffling the voices around like cards in a deck, and talking to them about how each of you have your own unique sound portrait. We, as much as possible, would like to allow you to retain that while also being an active listener, and that you should sing the way you want to sing every day in choir, and we're simply going to be moving you around in order to get you next to a singer that you're most comfortable singing with. And so we do that. And then I like to do mixed formation as much as possible. But that, of course, has to do with literacy. So I have to make sure that the singers are ready for that kind of challenge, usually around, I would say, week 7 in a 10-week cycle, maybe 6 if we're lucky. I can get them into a mixed formation. And I just like that, because I think you and I were talking before the show started that each voice type might have its own unique qualities as well. And so we want to, again, work for balance. And that comes with them being able to hear who's right next to them and create a nice blend.
Absolutely. So I just want to kind of, for our viewers, share what the Western Noble technique is a little bit more, so there's a little more clarity. And it's possibly another show we'll do in the future here, but it's where you take each individual voice and move them around the section and however you have them formed, shaped, and lined. And then some voices really don't like each other, and they combat each other, and they disagree, and some voices really then blend together and find that optimal balance of voices where they can fit most likely. Am I correct? And that's how you're interpreting and how you use the Western Noble technique? Yes,
and I would share too that I've sometimes read the term voice matching, but I personally am not trying to do that so much. But some people maybe are. But I think it's not so much about asking them to match their sound to each other, but again, what you say, helping them find where they're most comfortable to sing vibrantly, but also be able to hear. Because there's nothing worse than being in a choir where you can't hear yourself at all. So, yeah.
And there's an element to that too, where we have a dominant ear. And so sometimes we like to stand on certain places and stand next to certain people that we kind of gel better with. So no, it's a very important technique, and help people look into that more, and we can maybe hopefully talk about that in the future here. But before we conclude here, is there anything else that maybe came to mind that you want to share about choral tone, or maybe techniques that you use?
I might just say that I think that we think about tone sometimes pretty technically, and that is important. Like we need to know how the voice mechanism is working, and we need to know how to coach and speak in very specific terms with our singers so that they can actually change the sound without just relying on imagery or a beautiful story that we tell on any given day in rehearsal. But I also think that there is an aspect to tone that is somewhat psychological, and that singers really need to feel buoyant and joyful and safe and at times brave. If you can think about times you've been in choir where you've had to, start on a high note in a very soft dynamic at a performance, or maybe you find that all of a sudden your conductor's asking you to stand in a circle around the audience and you never got to practice that. Those kinds of experiences are awesome, but I think that we need to prepare our singers by creating a safe space for them and really emphasizing community and that feeling of agency, that every singer matters, that every singer has the skills they need to succeed and be really creative with their sound. And that makes it fun, which I think is a big thing of what choir should be fun. It shouldn't be too technical. So I would add that.
Absolutely. That's a great point there. Thank you for that. Well, Dr. Wyers, I want to say again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. This is a great idea.
Oh, yes, it's been a real pleasure talking with you. And to our viewers, thanks so much for watching. And I hope you continue to inspire the future leaders of our world through this wonderful gift we call music. Thanks.
Thank you.